In a small, peaceful village, surrounded by green hills and quiet fields, two farmers lived side by side. One was John, a hard-working man who had spent many years trying to grow crops, only to see them fail year after year. His farm was small, and the soil was not kind to him. John worked hard every day, from the crack of dawn until the sun went down, yet his harvests were small, and the profits were barely enough to survive. John had a kind face, but looked older than he was due to the hard labor. His clothes were simple, and his hands were rough from the work. Despite everything, John never gave up. He loved farming and believed that one day he would be able to grow enough crops to feed his family and pay his debts. Next door was Ahmed's farm. It was much larger and more successful than John's. Ahmed was a generous man, but also practical. His farm was filled with rows of crops that grew tall and strong. His barn was full of healthy animals, and his home was comfortable. Ahmed had worked hard too, but he had the right tools, good land, and a little luck on his side. People in the village often came to Ahmed for help, and he would give them advice or lend them money. John admired Ahmed's success, but felt a deep sense of shame. He couldn't understand why his farm always seemed to fail, while Ahmed's prospered. But they had been neighbors for many years and had become good friends. John would often visit Ahmed's farm to chat or help with small tasks, even though he struggled to keep his own farm afloat. One cold morning, John woke up to see another storm had passed through the village. He stepped outside and looked at his fields. The soil was wet and muddy, and the crops were barely hanging on. He knew he needed to do something, or he would lose his farm forever. With a heavy heart, John walked over to Ahmed's farm. He needed help. He had no money, and his farm had failed again. Ahmed had always been kind to him, so maybe he would lend him some money to buy better seeds or tools. When John arrived at Ahmed's house, Ahmed was sitting outside, enjoying the cool morning air. He looked up as John approached. "Good morning, John. You look troubled," Ahmed said, noticing the worry in his friend's eyes. John sighed deeply. "Morning, Ahmed. I need your help. My farm, it's failing again. The crops are ruined, and I don't know what to do." Ahmed paused for a moment, his eyes studying John. "I've seen you working hard, John. I know you care about your farm. What do you need?" "I need money," John said, his voice barely a whisper, "to buy new seeds, better tools, something to help me grow my crops." Ahmed nodded slowly. "I can help you, but I'll need a written agreement so that we're clear about how the loan will work." John looked down, unsure. "I don't have much to offer, Ahmed, but I promise you I will repay you." Ahmed smiled gently. "That's all I need to hear, John. We can write the agreement later. For now, let's focus on getting you the help you need." John felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had always respected Ahmed's generosity, but now he was even more grateful. In the weeks that followed, Ahmed gave John the money he needed to buy new seeds and tools. John was excited, but also nervous. This was his last chance to save his farm. He worked day and night, planting new crops, using the best tools he could afford, and hoping that this time the soil would be kind to him. His family was supportive. Sarah, his wife, helped him plant the seeds, and their children did what they could. They were a close-knit family, always working together to survive. But despite all their hard work, the first year was not kind to them. The crops grew, but they were smaller than expected. John felt defeated. He had hoped for a better harvest, but it seemed that the land was still not giving him what he needed. The little produce they did sell barely covered the cost of the seeds and tools. John could not shake the feeling of failure that weighed heavily on him. Despite his worry, Ahmed never showed any signs of impatience. Whenever John saw him, he would smile and ask about the farm. "How is the land this year?" Ahmed would ask kindly. John would shrug and shake his head. "It's not good. I don't know if I'll make it through another season." Ahmed would always reassure him. "Don't worry, John. Take your time. I know you're doing your best." John could not understand why Ahmed was so patient with him. After all, he had borrowed money from him, and there was no sign of repayment yet. But every time he felt like giving up, Ahmed's words gave him strength to keep going. The second year brought some improvement. The weather was kinder, and John's crops grew taller. He was still cautious, not wanting to get his hopes too high, but he worked hard, tending to his plants and animals. He took extra care with everything, hoping that this time the land would reward his efforts. By the middle of the year, John could see the difference. His crops were healthier, the vegetables were larger, and there were more of them. The animals were thriving too. He began to feel a small sense of hope. When the harvest finally came, it was better than he had imagined. There were enough crops to sell at the market, and John finally earned some money. It was not a huge amount, but it was a start. He sent some of it to Ahmed, hoping to make a small payment on the loan. Ahmed received the money and smiled when he saw John. "It looks like things are going better for you," he said. "I'm glad to see you've made progress." "I'm just getting started," John replied. "But it feels good to finally have a little success." Ahmed nodded. You've worked hard for this, John. You should be proud. John felt a deep sense of gratitude for his friend. Without Ahmed's help, he would never have made it this far. As the years passed, John's farm continued to improve. The soil was better, the crops were stronger, and the animals were healthy. John paid off most of the loan, though he had not yet paid everything back. He was determined to repay Ahmed in full. One day, as John went through his old papers, he realized that the written agreement he had made with Ahmed was missing. He searched his house, his barn, and even his fields, but it was nowhere to be found. Panic began to rise in his chest. Without the agreement, how could he prove the loan had ever existed? Would Ahmed be angry with him? John decided to visit Ahmed. He had to explain the situation and hope that his friend would understand. He felt nervous, but he knew he had to be honest. When John arrived at Ahmed's farm, he found him working in the fields. "Ahmed," John called out. Ahmed looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "John, what brings you here today?" John hesitated. "I need to talk to you. I've lost the written agreement we made. I don't know what to do." Ahmed stopped what he was doing and looked at John with a smile. "John, you don't need the agreement. I trust you." John blinked in surprise. "But I promised to repay you, and now there's no proof." "I don't need proof," Ahmed said softly. "What matters to me is your word. You've worked hard, and I know you'll repay me in your own time." John felt a weight lift from his chest. "Thank you, Ahmed. You don't know how much this means to me." "I do know," Ahmed replied. "And there's no need to rush. Help others in the village as I helped you." With Ahmed's blessing, John felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had worked so hard, trying to pay back his debts and improve his farm, but now it was clear to him that Ahmed did not need anything in return. Only John's integrity and the shared trust between them. That trust was more valuable than any written agreement, and it filled John with a sense of gratitude that he couldn't quite explain. One evening, as the sun set over the golden fields, John sat with Sarah in their small, cozy home. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, and their children played nearby, laughing and talking about their day. John looked out the window at the farm, which now showed signs of true prosperity. The harvest had been good, and the soil seemed to be more generous than it had ever been before. For the first time in years, John felt hope. "Sarah," he said softly, taking her hand, "I think it's time I did something for the village. Ahmed's help gave me a chance to turn things around. Now, I want to do the same for others." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with warmth and support. "What do you have in mind, John?" I want to start a cooperative farming initiative, John explained. I've learned so much about farming and how we can work together to grow more and share resources. If we all help each other, our village can thrive. Sarah smiled, her eyes twinkling with pride. That sounds like a wonderful idea. I know the village needs something like that. We can teach others what we've learned and make sure they don't struggle the way we did. John nodded, feeling a new sense of purpose. He immediately set out to visit the other farmers, starting with those who were most in need. He spoke to them about the idea of cooperation, of sharing land and resources, and about how working together could make everyone stronger. Some were hesitant, afraid of change, but John's sincerity and the example of his own success won many of them over. It didn't take long before a small group of farmers agreed to join John's cooperative. They started meeting regularly, sharing ideas, tools, and seeds. They discussed planting techniques, weather patterns, and the best ways to improve the soil. John and Ahmed were always at the heart of these meetings, leading the charge and helping others who were struggling. As more and more farmers joined, the village slowly began to change. The once barren fields now burst with life. There were rows of corn, beans, and wheat growing side by side, and orchards of fruit trees began to bloom. The market in the village square grew busier, and people started to feel a sense of hope. One of the most important things John and Ahmed worked on was teaching the farmers to share. There was enough land, enough tools, and enough knowledge to go around if everyone pitched in. Slowly but surely, the community began to pull together, and the spirit of cooperation filled the village. John spent many long days walking the fields with the farmers, helping them with their crops, teaching them how to use new techniques, and offering advice when needed. But it wasn't just about farming. John and Ahmed also worked on strengthening the bonds between the farmers. They would gather together in the evenings, share stories, and enjoy simple meals, strengthening the trust that was at the core of their efforts. One evening, after a long day of work in the fields, the group of farmers gathered around a large bonfire. The flames flickered, casting warm light over their faces as they laughed and shared their successes and failures. Ahmed stood up, raising a cup of fresh cider in his hand. To John, Ahmed said with a smile, "Without him, we would still be struggling on our own. His idea of cooperation has changed everything for us." The others raised their glasses in agreement, and John felt a warmth spread through his chest. He wasn't used to such praise, but it felt good to know that his efforts had made a real difference. "Thank you," John said humbly, his voice filled with emotion. "But it's not just me, it's all of you. We've all worked together to make this village strong again." As the evening wore on, John looked around at the faces of the farmers. They were laughing, talking, and enjoying the fruits of their labor. This was the life he had always dreamed of, a life where people supported each other and worked together for a common good. And it was all coming to life because of his and Ahmed's shared vision. Months passed, and the changes in the village became even more apparent. The fields were lush and green, and the village had started to become known for its abundance. The farmers had learned new methods of irrigation, crop rotation, and soil enrichment, and the community's bond had only grown stronger. Everyone pitched in when it was needed, and the children began to take an active interest in farming as well. The future of the village seemed secure. John and Ahmed watched their vision unfold together. They knew that their work was far from over, but they had laid the foundation for something that would last long after they were gone. John's name began to be spoken with respect, and people from neighboring villages came to learn from him and Ahmed. One day, as John and Ahmed were walking through the fields, Ahmed looked at his friend with pride. "You've done it, John. The village is thriving because of you." John smiled, but shook his head. "No, Ahmed, it's because of all of us. We built this together. I couldn't have done it without your support." Ahmed chuckled softly. "But it was your idea to bring everyone together. You gave them the hope they needed." John thought about it for a moment. It was true. His idea had started it all, but it was the people of the village who had truly made it a success. They had taken the vision and turned it into something real, something lasting. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the fields, John and Ahmed stood in silence for a moment, taking in the view. They knew that their work was not just about farming. It was about creating a community, a legacy, and a future for their children. John had started with nothing but a dream, and now that dream was alive and well, thriving in the fields of the village. The years passed, and John and Ahmed's bond grew stronger. Their families grew close as well. Sarah often spent time with Ahmed's wife, sharing advice on gardening and cooking, while their children played together in the fields, learning from their parents and the community. One summer evening, as the village gathered for a feast to celebrate the harvest, John stood beside Ahmed, looking around at the people who had become their family. The long table was filled with food, laughter, and conversation. The village was alive with energy, and John couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was the life he had worked for, the life he had dreamed of. "Thank you," John said quietly to Ahmed, his voice full of gratitude. Ahmed smiled and placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You've earned it, John. We've earned it."